We're GB News, and we come from a proud tradition of British journalism.
That's why I'm so excited to be here. It's something so new.
The first news channel to be launched in Britain in over 30 years.
Launched to represent the views of the British people.
To go where other broadcasters refuse to go.
How did you find out about the story in the first place?
Launched with one aim.
To be the fearless champion of Britain.
It's an absolutely fantastic atmosphere here.
This is GB News.
The People's Channel. GB News, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, every Sunday at 9:30 when I'll be interviewing the key players in British politics and taking them to task.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial.
With an upcoming election looming over Westminster, now is the time for clear, honest answers.
I agree.
And that's precisely what I'll get.
Is he indecisive? Incompetent?
That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's election channel.
GB News is the home of free speech. We were created to champion it, and we deliver it day in, day out.
Free speech allows us all to explore and debate openly the issues most important to us, our families, and of course, the British people.
Having challenging conversations to enlighten each other.
Which is why we hear all sides of the argument.
We are the People's Channel.
We will always stand by the freedom to express yourself.
On TV, radio and online.
This is GB News,
Britain's news channel.
It's 9 p.m. I'm Patrick Christys. Tonight,
Rishi Sunak, look me in the eye. When are you going to start to do the right thing? The vaccine damage payment scheme is not fit for purpose.
GB News is under attack. They are trying to silence us, and we cannot give in. My take on the Ofcom ruling, plus
West Bank, Gaza, it's about time we globalise the Intifada!
Yeah! Britain is at risk of being captured by extremists and communists, and as students stage a pro-Palestine die-in, do they realise a free Palestine would be a Taliban-like state? Also,
Great British Energy and what's the one I've missed? I've done them out of order.
West Street in cocks up, and
woman can have a penis.
Look, I'm not.
Remarkably, Labour now wants to make it easier to change gender.
It was incompetence, it was a disgraceful disregard of even the practices that were in place at the time.
Should we prosecute those responsible for the infected blood scandal? I speak to a victim's surviving relative, and Free Bella, the campaign to save the beautiful beluga whale trapped in a Korean shopping mall. My top panel tonight is Daily Express columnist Carol Malone, Labour Party member and journalist Benjamin Butterworth, and political commentator Suzanne Evans. Oh yes, and find out what is wrong with this. Get ready, Britain. Here we go. The communists want a revolution. Next.
Very good evening to you. I'm Aaron Armstrong in the GB Newsroom. A day of shame for the British state. The Prime Minister's reaction to the findings of a 5-year inquiry as he offered victims of the infected blood scandal a wholehearted apology. The final report identified a catalogue of failures by the NHS and successive governments and concluded thousands of deaths could have been avoided. Inquiry Chair Sir Brian Langstaff said the scandal had been exacerbated by a chilling cover-up from those in positions of power, including the deliberate destruction of documents by government officials. More than 30,000 people were infected with HIV and hepatitis C over more than 20 years because of contaminated blood products and transfusions.
This is a day of shame for the British state. Today's report shows a decades-long moral failure at the heart of our national life. From the National Health Service to the Civil Service, to ministers in successive governments, at every level, the people and institutions in which we place our trust failed in the most harrowing and devastating way. They failed the victims and their families, and they failed this country.
Well, the Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer, also apologised for what he's described as one of the UK's gravest injustices. Mayor of Greater Manchester, Andy Burnham, told GB News he thinks people should be held accountable.
Today's report should rock Whitehall to its foundations because Whitehall dug in behind a lie for decades, and that had very serious consequences for people's health and people's lives. So there has to be accountability. You know, we see in these situations, don't we, how there's a big injustice uncovered, like Hillsborough or Grenfell or the post office, and yet there isn't that individual accountability. But that has to follow, and in my view, prosecution should be considered in this case, including corporate accountability. I believe there may well be a case for corporate manslaughter against Whitehall departments as well.
The parents of a baby girl say they'll never forgive the callousness of a nursery worker who's been convicted of manslaughter. 37-year-old Kate Ruffley placed 9-month-old Genevieve Meehan face down on a beanbag for an hour and a half while working at the Tiny Toes nursery in Cheadlehume in May 2022. Colleagues and paramedics tried to revive her, but she was declared dead later that day. Ruffley's been remanded in custody and is due to be sentenced later this week. And Julian Assange can mount a fresh appeal against his extradition to the United States on charges of leaking military secrets. The WikiLeaks founder will now be able to challenge US assurances on how a trial there would be conducted and over the protection of his right to free speech. Mr. Assange faces prosecution on espionage charges relating to the disclosure of information about the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, which the US has argued endangered lives. For the latest stories, you can sign up to GB News Alerts. The QR code's on your screen. The details are also on our website. Now it's back to Patrick.
Ordinary people in Britain seriously need to wake up to the fact that we are being captured by an ever-increasing number of hardline communist organisations that are becoming more and more emboldened by the day. Just Stop Oil have long marched alongside communist groups. Communist organisations are behind the student pro-Palestine protests taking place at the moment. There is a huge crossover between communist groups and the wider pro-Palestine movement. There was a communist member of SAGE who said that she wanted government restrictions on our day-to-day lives to last forever. The head of the National Education Union has attended the Socialist Workers Marxist Conference. We have communist and radical left-wing groups organising mobile mobs to prevent the Home Office from taking people out of migrant hotels. This network is the Anti-Raids Coalition. They work hand in hand with organisations like Black Lives Matter, which has openly published a Marxist manifesto. It is time to prescribe the radical far left as the extremist groups they really are, and they should be made to pay for the damage they cause. We have been too complacent for too long in Britain, and it is time to say enough is enough. The anti-extremism czar, Lord Wolney, has said this.
These organisations have not yet been judged to meet the terrorist threshold, which is clearly defined and the Home Secretary has to rule on. But there is that space where if organisations are clearly using criminal tactics, they are not being deterred by the individual offences that activists are being charged with. But prescription has worked in the terrorist context to be able to restrict the activities of certain organisations. Okay. It's not perfect, but it can be an important tool.
If they are prescribed as extremists, then the police can actually step in and arrest them. This weekend saw more calls for intifada on the streets. And we've got police who feel too scared to act, but who will arrest individuals if they push somebody back after being shoved themselves by hardline members of the pro-Palestine brigade. Like a scene out of 1930s Germany, ordinary Jewish people who wanted to attend a Jewish film festival in Hampstead were greeted by people who turned up and started chanting about resistance.
1, 2, 3, 4. Occupation no more. 5, 6, 7, 8. Israel is a terrorist state. Israel
MPs even have fake dead babies put on their office steps, like Siobhan Bailey in Gloucestershire. Taxpayers have to fork out an extra £31 million for bodyguards and protective equipment for MPs, some of whom are wearing stab vests. But it's more than that. They're impacting people's lives, stopping ambulances, taking up police time, causing criminal damage, ruining businesses, preventing students from going to lectures. Britain has been too complacent. Whilst people have been sitting around, drinking Chablis and moaning around Brexit, the radical socialists and the communists have been organising and mobilising, and they are not going to simply just grow out of their ideology. They are here for revolution, and we need to wake up to that. Let's get the thoughts of my panel this evening. I am joined by Daily Express columnist Carol Malone, journalist and broadcaster Benjamin Butterworth, and political commentator Suzanne Evans. Carol, I'll start with you on this. We've been too complacent for too long in Britain, and we have been infiltrated.
Completely. On the first thing, we've been too complacent. Yeah, we see cops every week at these pro-Palestinian demos. Let's just point out there have now been 1,000 protests and vigils in recent months. It's cost £40 million, 55,000 police officer shifts, and yet they stand there, the cops, and they do nothing while all this goes on. You hear people shouting for Intifada, you hear, death, all these awful chants, and they're doing nothing, and they're encouraged to do nothing. And the same thing happens with Just Stop Oil. Even if you manage to get them to court, which is rare, they get a smack on the wrist from the magistrate or the judge or wherever. I think it's a great idea if we now start making them pay for the damage they've caused, because for them, a few days in jail, a few weeks in jail is actually a badge of honour. So that's good for them. But what would not be good for them if they have to sell their house to pay for the damage that they've caused to buildings and people.
Yeah, Benjamin, the communists have actually just been on the march whilst we've been asleep, no?
I mean, no, it's just absurd. Look, first of all, I think the idea that they should be prescribed as a terrorist group would undermine the real terrorist organisations that are doing terrible work. The idea that we don't prescribe supporters of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard, but we would somebody that thinks we need to cut our carbon emissions, I think would be a total insult and a misuse of state power.
Can I just say, I agree with you about the Iranian Revolutionary Guard, but what I would say is, does that person just want to cut carbon emissions, or are they also a member of the Revolutionary Communist Party?
Well, I'm sure there are people that sit in both camps, but that's called free speech and a right to protest. And I think we cut down on that at our risk.
What's not free speech is when you damage things, when you damage buildings, when you damage works of art, when you stop people getting to hospital by blocking emergency services. They're criminal offences.
And that I agree with. So I would make the point that given there are examples, including anti-Semitism at some of these protests, that are already illegal and the police are not enforcing the law, I think the government would do a better job to focus on the officers on the beat doing the laws that exist than doing this kind of posturing.
Should we make them pay for the damage and disruption, Suzanne?
Yeah, absolutely we should. I've been absolutely disgusted, I think, as most right-thinking people, when you see them desecrating paintings, throwing paint, smashing windows in buildings. I mean, this is astronomically awful. And worse, of course, it ups insurance premiums for the rest of us law-abiding citizens too. It might seem like a minor point, but actually that is critical. They just can't do these things. And Carol mentioned stopping ambulances. That day when Just Stop Oil refused to let ambulances through to hospital was, I think, a
and then lied about
low
it.
point.
And then lied about it.
Well. But this is nothing new. Black Lives Matter, hugely communist organisation. Some of us were always saying that. Look at what they stand for. They're communists.
They put a manifesto out there. The manifesto was out there.
It was out there for anyone with half a brain to Google and look at. And yet
can we just point out,
absolutely lauded.
Point out as well that, these pro-Palestinian protests, a couple of years ago, anti-Semitism was quite rightly seen on our streets as heinous. These people have actually made that mainstream now. For a lot of people, it's OK to hate Jewish people. Our capital city has become a no-go area for Jewish people at weekends. We've seen what's just happened there at their film festival. Shocking. These protests, when you talk about freedom, they've had freedom to protest and all the rest of it. They're not free to actually incite
I think we've been too complacent, Benjamin. We have to have a look at some of the people who have captured certain institutions. Sage had a communist there that was saying that we needed to have government restrictions on our lives on the day-to-day forever. You've got the head of the National Education Union who said some incredibly fruity things, has attended Marxist conferences, etc. These people have been very active whilst we've taken our eye off the ball, and they are there and they are not going away.
Look, I'm not a communist and I don't want communists in charge, but these people have got to those positions legitimately. That trade union is a democratic structure.
9%
and that's a function of a free state. What I would say is I think there is rank hypocrisy democracy from people who are calling for these groups to be terrorist organisations. I'll tell you what, when the farmers went and blocked Parliament Square and stopped people getting through with their tractors in opposition to policies about how farming would do, well, the people that would have a problem with this were celebrating that. When the truckers in Canada blocked a whole city of Ottawa and stopped ambulances getting through and all sorts, you had the anti-COVID squad saying that that was fantastic. So you know what? You start to prescribe these groups and cut down on the right to protest at your risk because there is such hypocrisy.
These protests are achieving nothing.
You can't cut down on protest. I totally agree. I think there is absolutely a place for direct action, but not when you're damaging private property with absolutely no consequences whatsoever. I think we have a highly politicised judiciary now, and I think, as Carol rightly said, this is why people who are causing criminal damage, who in any other context would get a fine at least, if not a criminal record.
This is exactly one of the key points, right? We have these absolute radicals now at universities. I know people will say that they've always been there. I think they're now bolder than they've been in recent times. We've got them in our education system. We've got them at the unions. Again, not exactly a shock, but how emboldened are they now? The judiciary, I really think there is a case to be made for some people who are at least very sympathetic to this lot as well. And we see them now becoming bolder and bolder and bolder. And we forgot the extremism czar, who is finally saying, well, it is within our Home Office's powers to actually do something about this. People might not like to admit it. People like to think, oh, this lot will grow out of it when they buy a house and this, that and the other. I don't want to live in a country where we have to live through these people's mistakes in order to realise how evil and wrong it is.
You know, where are for all these people, the pro-Palestinian protesters, where are all the protests against the Chinese, against the Saudis, if they're so if they're so minded? They don't. This is actually a political protest. This is not about Palestine per se for a lot. This is a political protest. But I find it astonishing now that we have students who are on campuses. You know what I think I'm going to find really interesting in the summer, when the summer break comes, is their devotion to the Palestinian cause going to let them go off on holiday for 10 weeks? I'm suspecting.
I'll tell you how I think that'll end. When actual homeless people move into those camps. And they will not be able to deal with them. They won't like them. It'll be a bit too earthy for them. And then all of a sudden they'll decide that they've got to go home for the holidays.
They will go home.
Benjamin, are you not concerned by the rise of communism now in this country? We're seeing the people who are linked to communist organisations mobilising, stopping government policy, stopping these so-called immigration raids, sitting in front of buses. And ordinary people who sit alongside them do not realise that there is a card-carrying militant communist next to them.
No. And frankly, I think if you claim to believe in free speech, then you should say that your arguments win out, not shutting people down through laws passed in Parliament. I'm far more concerned about people on the far right, like Lee Anderson, than I am people on the
right. Come on, he's not far right. These protests, do you think they should go on indefinitely? How long would you say that these pro-Palestinian protests should go on?
I think there should be much better police because there's definitely anti-Semitism at them, and that's not acceptable.
But how long?
The thing is,
how long do you think we can have a police force governing them and actually not being able to tackle crime on the streets? So how long? A year, 2 years, 3 years? How long?
Well, the people that oppose the COVID jabs are still going on moaning and protesting.
They're not going on. I'm sorry, they're not taking over the capital city every weekend, but these guys are.
And actually, they never had protests anyway and took over the capital city. Anti-lockdown protesters did, yes, but not anti-vaxxers.
And they did it for a few weeks. This has gone on for months and months, and it's cost.
Can I just ask you, know, when you bandy around things like Lee Anderson is far right, do you worry that maybe you might be being a bit of a useful idiot to the far left?
No, I don't. Because actually I think what Lee Anderson advocates for is dangerous and a threat to this country.
What does he advocate?
And frankly,
what does he advocate?
Well, the kind of rhetoric he says, the kind of language he uses, which I think is akin to racism at times, I believe is dangerous.
And what they're doing,
that's why,
don't
ask me, ask the Prime Minister, he got rid of him.
When they've got coffins with, death to Jews on the street, that's all right.
No, that's despicable and racist. Okay. And that's why, as I said, the police should enforce the laws.
All I'm saying is, we have an anti-extremism czar now who is finally saying that Britain needs to wake up, and I would echo that. I would also like to echo that I imagine Lee Anderson would deny that he's a racist. Right, moving on, in yet another handbrake turn, it's time for the Great British Giveaway. Your chance to win £20,000 in cash for the summer. What would you spend it on? A dream holiday? Get the garden done? Or perhaps treat the family? Well, you have to hurry, as time is ticking for your chance to make it yours. Here's how.
It's the biggest cash prize we've given away to date. An incredible £20,000 that you could use however you like. And because it's totally tax-free, every single penny will be in your bank account to do whatever you like with. £20,000 in tax-free cash really could be yours this summer. Hurry, you've got to be in it to win it. For another chance to win £20,000 in tax-free cash, text WIN to 63232. Text costs £2 plus one standard network rate message. Or post your name and number to GB05, PO Box 8690, Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on the 31st of May. Full terms and privacy notice at gbnews.com/win. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
Right, coming up, world-famous author Salman Rushdie has delivered a much-needed dose of reality to Hamas's useful idiots on the left.
If there was a Palestinian state, it would be run by Hamas. And that would make it a Taliban-like state.
Exactly. So is he right that the far-left activists who are calling for a free Palestine would actually result in a terrorist state? Fleet Street legend Kelvin Mackenzie has his say shortly. Plus, does anyone in the Labour Party know what they stand for?
Great British Energy and... what's the one I've missed? I've done them out of order.
But first, Labour now remarkably wants to make it easier to change gender by potentially allowing just one GP to sign off a gender recognition certificate. But would it be right to simplify the life-changing and sometimes irreversible process? Co-founder of Sex Matters, Maya Forstater, goes head-to-head with the founder of See Change Happen, Joanne Lockwood, and that's next.
Good afternoon, Britain. Weekdays from midday.
Well, Welsh farmer Gareth Wyn-Jones is a first-language Welsh speaker and joins us now. Gareth, I mean, a lot of people will be thinking, hang on, this guy is a Welsh teacher. He speaks English. He knew what was on the parking ticket. He's just trying to make a point. He's being a prat, isn't he?
No, hey, come on, mate. I'm a first language Welsh. It's important that we watch after our language and, you know, that everything's bilingual. For us in Wales, you wouldn't go to France and expect your ticket to be in English, would you? You know, English is the most spoken language, but let's watch after these small languages. It's part of our cultural. So, you know what, I take my hat off to the guy. Fair play to him for go out and to fight this. But what it's done is put it onto the mainstream media, and you're talking about it, even that you're calling them that. You know, at least we're having a discussion about it, and it's putting the Welsh language in the forefront. And,
so,
you know,
Gareth,
speaking Welsh is important.
Yeah, so Gareth, this is a matter of principle. Is there a sense that the Welsh language is being eradicated in Wales? Is this something that the Welsh people need to rise up against?
Well, Welsh government are trying to, you know, bring a lot more Welsh speaking into our daily life and teach people how to speak Welsh. Well, everything should be bilingual then. And I think, you know, it should start with government. So government should be putting pressure on these companies to make sure everything is bilingual. So I get behind this guy. Fair play to him. It's a good stance, and it puts it in the public eye. Let's have everything in both languages, especially Welsh, because that's my first language. And I'm
you know what? If I was Welsh, if I were Welsh, I think I would agree with you. I think I would agree with you, Gareth.
It depends if you come from Wrexham.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, every Sunday at 9:30 when I'll be interviewing the key players in British politics and taking them to task.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial.
With an upcoming election looming over Westminster, now is the time for clear, honest answers.
I agree.
And that's precisely what I'll get.
Is he indecisive? Incompetent?
That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's election channel.
We're GB News, and we come from a proud tradition of British journalism.
That's why I'm so excited to be here. It's something so new.
The first news channel to be launched in Britain in over 30 years.
Launched to represent the views of the British people. To go where other broadcasters refuse to go.
How did you find out about the story in the first place?
Launched with one aim.
To be the fearless champion of Britain.
It's an absolutely fantastic atmosphere here.
This is GB News.
GB News, Britain's news channel.
2024, a battleground year.
The year the nation decides.
As the parties gear up their campaigns for the next general election.
Who will be left standing when the British people make one of the biggest decisions of their lives?
Who will rise?
And who will fall?
Let's find out together.
For every moment, the highs, the lows, the twists and turns.
We'll be with you for every step of this journey.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel.
Welcome back to Patrick Christys Tonight. Coming up, would a free Palestine be like a Taliban state? But first, are Labour right to make it easier to change gender? It's time now for the head-to-head. Well, remarkably, Labour have announced plans to make it easier to change gender by scrapping the panel of doctors and lawyers currently needed to approve a gender recognition certificate and instead requiring just one doctor to be involved in the process. Sir Keir Starmer's party are considering allowing GPs, not gender specialists, to sign off the legally binding documents. But the decision could prove to be a political headache for Starmer in the run-up to the next election. Labour was quick to voice its support for the findings of the landmark Cass review into gender services for kids, with Shadow Health Secretary Wes Streeting describing it as a watershed moment and vowing to implement all of the review's recommendations. And Starmer himself finally admitted that a woman is an adult human female last year after months of dodging the question. That came at the same time as his party dropped its plans to allow gender self-ID in the wake of the SNP's disastrous Gender Recognition Act. Look, fast forward to today, and Labour appears to be hurtling back towards a more lax position on gender and indeed women's rights. So, are Labour right to make it easier to change gender? Let me know your thoughts. Go to gbnews.com/your say or tweet me at gbnews. And while you're there, go and vote in our poll. I'll bring you the results very shortly. But first, going head-to-head on this. Are the founder of See Change Happen, Joanne Lockwood, and the co-founder and CEO of Sex Matters, Maya Forstater? Both of you, thank you very, very much. Maya, I'll start with you. I'm going to start with the human implications of this decision from Labour, OK? If Labour makes it easier for people to change gender, will it mean more lives are ruined?
Labour's not clear what they're doing. Labour have said that they will protect single-sex services for women's privacy and dignity. So it's not clear how making it so much easier for somebody to get a certificate that says that a man to get a certificate that says he's a woman is going to enable them to also protect women's single-sex services. It's a mess, is what it is.
Do you think, just Maya, sticking with you on this before I move it on, do you think that the actual implications of somebody being able to walk into a GP's practice and have one GP decide that they can legally now be a woman and then potentially go on a road to irreversible transitioning, that in itself is a concern?
Well, those are two quite different things. I mean, a gender recognition certificate is just a piece of paper. It doesn't change anything about a person's body, but it does change something about the law, and nobody really knows exactly what it does. Is it a piece of paper that allows a man to use a women's service? The government's just not been clear about it. Labour's not been clear about it. The question about taking hormones, having surgery is quite separate from how the government gives out this piece of paper and what it means. But particularly when they're giving them out to young people, so an 18-year-old, for example, could go into their GP and say, I'd like to change to be the opposite sex, and be given this piece of paper and be told legally you are now the opposite sex. I think that is very concerning. Okay.
All right, I'll come back to you. Joanne, I'm going to stick on the human and the health implications for now on this. I'm going to ask you the same question, because if somebody who's potentially quite vulnerable and has different issues going on as well walked into a GP surgery now, under a Labour government conceivably anyway, they could be set on a path for an irreversible physical transition, could they not, off the basis of one singular GP's appointment. Is that not a concern?
Yes, good evening, Patrick. What I would say is it's fantastic that we can finally see a government in waiting standing up to humanise a process. The current government seems set on dehumanising the existence of trans people, and that's trans women. We often ignore trans men in this equation. I also believe that the GPs will need support, they'll need guidance, they will need training, because many GPs are not confident currently in terms of supporting transgender people. So we haven't seen the support and guidance that GPs will be offered. I don't believe for one moment that this will make it a case of turn up one day, get a gender recognition certificate the next day. The current process takes years and years and years. We're waiting for GIC appointments, which can take up to 5 years for the first appointment. The second appointment takes probably 2 years after that.
But isn't that the point? You want to make it easier. Isn't that the point?
The GP will sign off a passport application now, and if you look at some of the base requirements to get a GRC at the moment, a passport is one of those significant steps. And a GP currently provides the evidence to the passport office to support the transfer of a passport from one gender to another.
OK, Maya, let's move on to the political implications of this, although they are interlinked, because I wonder how it's going to play with the electorate at the next election that a vote for Labour might essentially mean more men in women's spaces.
We know from polling that that's not what people want. What people want is privacy and dignity, single-sex spaces, and also unisex spaces so that everyone's included. And Labour knows this. Labour has said that this is what they're going to deliver. But then on the other hand, they're also saying they're going to make it easier for people to pay £5 to go into their GP and to get a certificate that says they're the opposite sex. These two things don't add up. So they're going to have to explain themselves to the electorate.
And unfortunately, Joanne, that is actually quite unpopular with the electorate, isn't it? As the SNP found out, as people in Ireland recently found out, and there is going to be that issue hanging over Keir Starmer's head at the next election, conceivably, which is, hang on a minute, if I vote for you, as a woman, am I going to end up seeing more blokes in my changing room?
No, you won't. You won't see more blokes, because the trans men will obviously use the men's changing rooms, and the trans women, who are women, will be using the female changing rooms. You won't be seeing more blokes anywhere. This is simply a scaremongering technique. We're seeing misinformation being put out around the popularity of these anti-trans views. The reality is most people are supportive. If you look at corporate England, corporate Wales, corporate Scotland, you're seeing a lot more support and love and support for trans people. So I think all this negative rhetoric, it just doesn't play out in reality. People can keep talking about it, but it just doesn't play out, Patrick.
Well, I mean, it does, really, when you actually look at... It's all very well and good saying about the corporates, right? But we all know who the corporate people have been captured by, whereas when it comes to actual public opinion polls, etc. It's all very well and good when you ask people questions like, do you support someone's right to exist or something? Yeah, fine. But when you ask women, Maya, do you want trans people in your changing rooms? They tend to say no.
Well, do you want male people in your changing rooms is what you're asking. I mean, call yourself what you like, wear what you like, but I see you as a bloke. And if you're in a changing room with me or with other women, they're going to see you as a bloke. And it doesn't matter what the corporate bosses say. This is about what women and girls want and need, which is privacy and dignity from male people.
OK, Joanne, final word to you.
You're creating that myth and you're propagating that myth. The reality is that most people are supportive, and you can keep saying to the cows come home that there's this tide of backlash, but it's not. It's a minority view. It's a vocal minority view.
So, all right, I mean, is it a vocal minority of you, Maya, or actually, as many people think, it might be the other way around?
No, when you ask most people, they say they support trans people to live their life free from violence, free from discrimination, but they don't support male people to be in women's hospital wards, in women's showers, in women's changing rooms. It's just not right.
Okay.
I don't want men in my changing rooms either. I'm a woman. I will be in a changing room that is safe from predatory men, the same as you want to be.
Sorry, you're not.
OK, all right. I think that seems like a good point to...
lawfully, actually, legally, I am. So
well,
exactly.
I'm afraid... And this is the point.
That's the problem with the views you hold.
Look, that's exactly it. So that is actually the great point to finish it on, because legally, that would... What Labour want to do, conceivably, would mean that more people, Joanne, would be legally in your position, and I suppose, you know, with respect, it's up for people to make their own minds up about whether or not they think that should be made easier. But there we go. Look, both of you, thank you very, very much. That is the founder of See Change Happen, Joanne Lockwood, and the co-founder and CEO of Sex Matters, Maya Forstater. Look, who do you agree with? Would the Labour Party be right to simplify this gender-changing process? Amy on X says, Labour has a massive lead in the polls due to the Tories being useless. Are they trying to sabotage their own chances by saying this absolute nonsense? They are a joke. Andrew says, it's not right that you can get it through the NHS as it's not a life-threatening condition. Interesting point there. James says, you can't change what you biologically are. You are either born male or female. Not a huge amount of shades of grey in the inbox there, it must be said. But your verdict is now in. Wow. 2% of you say that Labour are right, whilst 98% of you say that Labour are wrong. Considering that the last GB News poll found that a plurality of our viewers want to vote Labour at the next election, I think that should be quite concerning for Keir Starmer. Coming up, Israel has denied involvement in the helicopter crash that killed the Iranian president and foreign minister. But with Putin offering to help with its investigation, how devastating could the fallout of this be? Will it actually spill out onto the streets of Britain? British-Iranian journalist Sahar Zand has been speaking to people on the ground, and she gives us her expert insight shortly. I'll also be giving you my take on Ofcom's ridiculous decision to find that the GB News People's Forum with Rishi Sunak was in breach of its guidelines. Don't miss that at 10. But next, intimidation of Jewish people has become commonplace in the UK, all in the name of a free Palestine. But would a free Palestine actually be like a Taliban state, as world-renowned author Salman Rushdie claims? Kelvin Mackenzie is live, and he's next.
Evening, welcome to your latest weather update from the Met Office here on GB News. A messy picture with the weather tomorrow. Most of us cloudier and cooler than today, but again, like today, there will be a few thunderstorms in place. We're between weather systems, but this area of low pressure is pushing up from the south and will generate a few more showers. We'll see the cloud thickening across East Anglia and the East Midlands with some showers here. The downpours we've seen across Northern Ireland, they will continue to fade through this evening, and many places will have a dry night. A bit misty and murky once more on these eastern coasts. Quite chilly across Scotland again. Temperatures down to about 3 to 5 degrees in rural spots, whereas in the south, many towns and cities staying in double figures. A cloudier day then on Tuesday, particularly over the Midlands, parts of northeast England and along the east coast of Scotland, especially Aberdeenshire up towards Orkney. Grey, misty and murky with that har sticking around, but a good part of Scotland actually starting sunny. Generally a dry start in Northern Ireland, but we are looking at some thunderstorms breaking out here later on. And we'll start with a lot of cloud over the Midlands, Northern England, and generally quite a drab day over central and eastern England. But some sunshine for Wales and southwest England. As the day goes on, increasing chance of again seeing some thunderstorms breaking out across Northern Ireland, but also southwestern parts of England. There's a Met Office warning in place. Wet weather will continue to affect parts of central and eastern England. A few scattered showers over the Highlands. Some brightness in western Scotland, but as I said, most places cloudier than today, and as a result, cooler. More cloud and rain then spill in from the east as we head into Wednesday. Could be a very soggy day over parts of eastern England and parts of Scotland. Some heavy downpours possible. And in the south, some brighter spells may well trigger some heavy showers as we go through the day. There'll be a bit more of a breeze coming in from the east, so a cool day here with some brightness further south. We could again get up to 20 Celsius. Bye for now.
Weekdays on GB News. Wake up to breakfast every day from 6 a.m. Followed by Britain's Newsroom at 9:30. At noon, it's Good Afternoon Britain. Followed by Martin Daubney from 3 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michael Portillo. This is GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News is Britain's election channel.
And when the big stories break, we're tackling them on Britain's Newsroom. When we disagree, and we disagree a lot, it's even livelier than normal.
We don't disagree that much.
We do. His comedy, though, is revolting. I knew her, unlike you. That explains Beverly Turner's temperament.
It's a bit frothy in here, isn't it?
He'll have one of me one day.
For dartball practice. Britain's Newsroom on GB News. Weekdays, 9:30 a.m.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We're proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, and as you know, we always love to hear your views. Now, there's a new way of getting in touch with us at gbnews.com/your-say. By commenting, you can be part of a live conversation and join our GB News community. You can even talk to me, Bev Turner, or any of the members of the GB News family.
I'm Ellie Costello, and thank you so much for joining us here on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to Patrick Christys Tonight. And the student protests over the war in Gaza continue to get more and more unhinged. On Saturday, there was a die-in staged at Oxford University. Protesters donned fake blood and pretended to be dead at the entrance of a graduation ceremony, and as you can see, guests were forced to step over them. Worse than that, the bloody effigies of dead babies were dumped at the office doorstep of Conservative MP for Stroud, Siobhan Bailey. These were done by separate activists. But a literary festival in Berlin saw the author Salman Rushdie say this.
I would just like some of the protests to mention Hamas. It's very strange for young, progressive student politics to kind of support a fascist terrorist group. Because, they're talking about free Palestine. Right now, if there was a Palestinian state, it would be run by Hamas. And that would make it a Taliban-like state.
And he's right, because astonishingly, the latest information coming out of the West Bank is that support for Hamas is rising. OK? So support for Hamas is rising. Kelvin Mackenzie joins me now. Kelvin, what would a free Palestine look like in reality, do you think? Do these Oxford students and co know?
Well, what is odd about it is that the hatred, and I presume it's a form of anti-Semitism, of Israel is so large that we now are in a situation where students, quotes, liberals, progressives, call them what you like, would rather have the murderous fascists who have run Gaza since 2007 or something, they would rather have them, the killers, the rapists, than they would have the Democrats from Israel. Why is that? Now, Salman Rushdie, right, gave his eye. He almost gave his life, right? For what did he do, right? Remember, Hamas is a client state of Iran. And it was the Iranian Khomeini, the supreme leader, the one before the last one, right, who said, right, we don't like your book, we're issuing a fatwa, and one day we will get you. And they did get him. And that is what's going to apply to the rest of us. So the issue now is there is a madness from the centre, because it's when you look at the people who are protesting, yes, there are loads of Muslims in this country, right? But actually, there are loads of middle-aged white people as well. What is their politics? Do they not understand what fascism and oppression? It's been a military dictatorship in Gaza now for 15 years.
But the idea that if Palestine was free, they would overthrow the shackles of Hamas and elect some kind of wonderful liberal democracy is being shattered by this. Polling conducted by the Palestinian Centre for Policy and Survey Research in Ramallah showed a rise for support in Hamas. In fact, in the West Bank, they've had some university student elections there. They've elected Hamas representatives. If Palestine was free, there is now a chance, or quotes unquote free, there is now a chance that the people there would choose to elect Hamas.
Right. If it is a democracy, right, they can elect whoever they like, right? I don't care. But if Hamas act like they did before, which is actually, by the way, oh, there's a hospital over there. I tell you what, we'll dig a tunnel underneath. We'll play the long game. We'll wait and then come out and kill every Jew that we can lay our hands on. No, I don't want them. And the other issue about progressives is where are Ireland in all this, right? Ireland then announced, little old Ireland, right? whose history itself, by the way, they have embraced fascism before. After all, in the Second World War, they refused to fight against Hitler. And what did Hitler do? He killed 6 million Jews. How many Jews would Hamas like to do? On one night, they killed 1,300. So why are Ireland doing it? A democratic state. What is it about democracy and ordinary people that they embrace a society like Gaza?
Well, this is a great point. So for states out there, not just individuals, not just students who cover themselves in fake blood outside a university, but for actual states who are calling for a quote-unquote free Palestine, what they are calling for, really, is a Taliban-like state, from which, presumably, a base could be formed to attack the West.
Right, attack the West, definitely be right next to Israel. But actually, when we just use the word Taliban, it kind of loses its punch, doesn't it? Taliban, ask 50% of Afghanistan, right? What's your life like? Are you allowed to work? Are you allowed to dress whatever you like? Are you allowed to go anywhere without permission of men? Doesn't the idiots, for instance, the idiots of Ireland understand what Taliban states look like? Why on earth would a democracy, a Western democracy, want to embrace that kind of approach?
Look, whilst I broadly agree with you, I will just push back ever so slightly and just say that I know there are a huge number of people in Ireland who are deeply unhappy with the current political situation, their rulers.
They're entitled to be unhappy with it, but are they?
I think it's some idiots in Ireland,
yeah,
right? But,
OK,
yeah.
all right.
But can I also just put this to you, that actually what we are seeing now at universities and from academics and from some of those kind of middle-aged lovies that you were mentioning before is actually a hatred of the West. They have decided that we've got this horrific colonial capitalist past, and that is why they now will be shouting for things like a free Palestine without realising that what they are doing is instilling a terrorist regime.
And also the other thing it does is it encourages... Now, look, if you are a Muslim, you are likely to want to be on the side of the people that you believe are being oppressed. When you see useful idiots like middle-aged academics wandering alongside you, it will embolden them politically to act as a unit.
Yeah.
And by the way, today, OK, it's only 3 or 4%. Look down the road 20 years, you know, that number may be 15%. That will be a powerful lobby, and we will end up with foreign policies that we currently despise because we weren't strong enough and understood that, in fact, they were a danger to our society.
Yeah. Yeah, look, Kelvin, thank you very, very much. Absolute pleasure talking to you about that particular topic. And again, I just want to emphasise, you know, there's quite devastating facts now that support for Hamas in the West Bank and that region is rising. So when people go out and they campaign for a quote-unquote free Palestine, you are saying you want a Hamas-run state. All right? Coming up, I'll give my take on Ofcom's chilling attack on free speech. Is GB News being unfairly targeted by the regulator? But next, well, Israel has denied involvement in this helicopter crash that killed the Iranian president, whilst the Iranian people have started celebrating on the streets the demise, that is, of the man dubbed the Butcher of Tehran. Will his death be a watershed moment? And what I want to know is, what does this mean for Iran's capacity on the streets of Britain? British-Iranian journalist Zahar Zand has been speaking to the people on the ground in Iran. She gives us her expert insight, and that's next.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 p.m.
Yes, has common sense won the day at the NHS? Yes, so someone seems to have woken up and realised people are more interested in the NHS making sick people better than calling them by the correct pronoun. Health Secretary Victoria Atkins is making changes to the NHS constitution, which will see phrases like chest feeding and people with ovaries outlawed. Even Keir Starmer is getting on board.
To get the clarity, is it right or is it wrong for Rosie Duffield to say only women have a cervix?
Well, look, biologically, she, of course, is right about that.
So do you owe her an apology?
Well,
yes. Do you owe her an apology? This has been somewhat ongoing. But actually, Christys, the NHS constitution, my understanding is it has to be changed or ratified by the health sector every 10 years.
Yeah.
So it feels like this is coming more from the government and not actually coming from the NHS at all.
Oh, you mean because it's just time? It's just like, it's time to have a look at the lease sort of thing. The 10 years are up.
But it's just that also a lot of NHS leaders are kind of saying, oh, no, we should not do this, or there's going to be complications. It feels like it's not coming. It feels like the NHS is still institutionally captured, and this is the government going, finally, no, enough is enough. Sex matters.
Right, yeah. So, OK, so I said there was nothing Rishi could do. I mean, this helps, doesn't it? It's time. It's time. That was fun watching that. I'd like that to have gone on a bit longer. I think the bit I was really going to enjoy was when he did or didn't give his apology. That's what I'd like to
Well, also, I think they should have just brought Rosie Duffield in. We've got Rosie here!
Oh, fantastic. Yes, like a sort of 90s Cilla Blacks.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Yeah.
Matthew, tonight, I'm Rosie Duff.
Yes.
I'm dry ice.
Surprise. What's the question? Has common sense prevailed?
Well,
yes,
I mean, but you say it's got... That's my fear of it.
GB News is the home of free speech. We were created to champion it, and we deliver it day in, day out.
Free speech allows us all to explore and debate openly the issues most important to us, our families, and of course, the British people.
Having challenging conversations to enlighten each other.
Which is why we hear all sides of the argument.
We are the People's Channel.
We will always stand by the freedom to express yourself.
On TV, radio, and online.
This is GB News,
Britain's news channel.
I'm Christopher Hope.
And I'm Gloria Di Piero, bringing you
PMQs live here on GB News.
Whenever Parliament is in session on a Wednesday at midday, we'll bring you live coverage of Prime Minister's questions. We'll be asking our viewers and listeners to submit the questions that they would like to put to the Prime Minister, and we'll put that to our panel of top politicians in our Westminster studio.
That's PMQs live here on GB News, Britain's election channel.
Welcome back to Patrick Christys tonight. Coming up, is Ofcom treating GB News unfairly? But first, look, Iran has been plunged into 5 days of national mourning after the country's president, Ibrahim Raisi, and Foreign Minister Hossein Amir Abdollahian were killed in a helicopter crash on Sunday, while Raisi was returning to Iran after opening a dam on the Azerbaijan border where the helicopter crashed in heavy fog. Despite the supposed period of national mourning, some Iranians have instead celebrated the death of the president, who earned a reputation as the hardline cleric that oversaw a brutal crackdown, especially on women. His death comes at an already turbulent time in the Middle East. As we all know, Iran last month launched a barrage of missiles towards Israel. The president's unexpected death has raised questions about more instability in the Middle East. And is it a step towards World War III? What does that mean for us here on the streets of Britain? I'm joined now by British-Iranian journalist and documentary filmmaker Sahar Zan. Sahar, thank you very much. Look, I just want to start by localising this a bit for people here in Britain, OK? We know that Iran has bad actors here. What will this mean for us?
The short answer, Patrick, is not much. The system in Iran is designed in a way that essentially, at the end of the day, it's the Supreme Leader Ayatollah Khamenei that has the final say in what happens. And people like Raisi, he might be the president, they're essentially dancing to the tune, to the music of Khamenei. So even though we are seeing some changes in Iran in terms of economy, the rial, for example, plummeted in compared to the US dollar, nothing really is going to change in the way that Iran has been acting inside of Iran and outside, including here in Britain.
How worried should people in Britain be about Iran's influence over here, and especially when it comes to some of the marches, etc., that we're seeing taking place at the moment?
I don't think I'm best placed to answer that, but from my research in the past few weeks, especially, I know that there was an article that you guys actually covered as well about Iran's influence here in the UK. We know that they do have influence in some of the mosques, and they do spread the propaganda of Iranian regime. But what we do need to bear in mind is that the majority of Iranians, including those here in Britain and inside of Iran, don't want this regime. That's why they risk their lives. They risk their safety and security and freedom to go out on the street and to protest against this regime.
Yeah, and I think that is really important to remember. Do you think that Iran might weaponise this now against the West? I mean, they are yet to try to say that anyone else is responsible for this particular incident involving a helicopter and the death of their president and foreign minister. I am deeply sceptical as to why both of those individuals appear to be travelling on the same helicopter at the same time. That seems like quite a basic error. But are you worried that there is a chance that this is a step towards an escalation?
I'm not really worried, no. And my guess is as good as yours as to how the Islamic Republic is going to react. We know that they are very unpredictable and there are a lot of speculations at the moment. All I have seen in regards to people from the inside of the regime and their reaction to the West is from the former foreign minister, Zarifi, blaming America, the US, for the harsh landing or the crash, as they initially called it, the harsh landing, the crash of this plane, saying that it's because of the sanctions that Iran couldn't afford a better plane and a better system, and therefore this plane crashed.
Okay.
So
we've played some footage just before of fireworks off in the street, people, you know, drinking, etc., women without the veils on and all of that stuff. What are the chances of a kind of uprising in Iran as a result of this?
Well, the protest that began after the killing of 22-year-old Mahsa Amini in the custody of the country's notorious morality police, we saw hundreds, thousands of people across the country coming out protesting. And these nationwide protests were the biggest threat to the existence of the Islamic Republic since its foundation in 1979. And these protests were met with a widespread crackdown, excuse me. We know that 9 people so far have been executed. Over 500 people were killed only in the first few months of the protest, 60 of them children. And so this crackdown has meant that people stopped coming outside, which led to many people assuming that this movement is over. But when I speak to people inside of Iran, they tell me that the movement is not over, that they're protesting however they can, and that things are only quiet and there is a fire still alive under the ashes and they're waiting for a spark. This could be a spark, but right now what I'm seeing is that people are actually celebrating. I was talking to some of the people who protested previously on the streets. They were telling me that there are people giving out sweets on the streets, that they're smiling at each other. We saw on social media videos of people celebrating. And what many people are actually upset about is the fact that Raisi died so fast and without actually being tried in a criminal court, as many were hoping it would happen.
Sahar, thank you. I really hope to speak to you again as this develops. That's Sahar Zandes, a British-Iranian journalist and filmmaker. Right, look, coming up, as Rishi Sunak apologises to victims of the infected blood scandal, branding it a day of shame for the British state, should there be prosecutions now for those who aided the sickening cover-up? I speak to a victim surviving relative in the next hour. But next, GB News is under attack. They are trying to silence us. We absolutely cannot give in. I'll give you my take on the Ofcom ruling next. You will not want to miss that. It's Patrick, Christys tonight. We are only on GB News, and now it's your weather.
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Evening, welcome to your latest weather update from the Met Office here on GB News. A messy picture with the weather tomorrow. Most of us cloudier and cooler than today, but again, like today, there will be a few thunderstorms in place. We're between weather systems, but this area of low pressure is pushing up from the south and will generate a few more showers. We'll see the cloud thickening across East Anglia and the East Midlands with some showers here. The downpours we've seen across Northern Ireland, they will continue to fade through this evening, and many places will have a dry night. A bit misty and murky once more on these eastern coasts. Quite chilly across Scotland again. Temperatures down to about 3 to 5 degrees in rural spots, whereas in the south, many towns and cities staying in double figures. A cloudier day then on Tuesday, particularly over the Midlands, parts of northeast England and along the east coast of Scotland, especially Aberdeenshire up towards Orkney. Grey, misty and murky with that har sticking around, but a good part of Scotland actually starting sunny. Generally a dry start in Northern Ireland, but we are looking at some thunderstorms breaking out here later on. And we'll start with a lot of cloud over the Midlands, Northern England, and generally quite a drab day over central and eastern England. But some sunshine for Wales and southwest England. As the day goes on, increasing chance of again seeing some thunderstorms breaking out across Northern Ireland, but also southwestern parts of England. There's a Met Office warning in place. Wet weather will continue to affect parts of central and eastern England. A few scattered showers over the Highlands. Some brightness in western Scotland, but as I said, most places cloudier than today, and as a result, cooler. More cloud and rain then spill in from the east as we head into Wednesday. Could be a very soggy day over parts of eastern England and parts of Scotland. Some heavy downpours possible. And in the south, some brighter spells may well trigger some heavy showers as we go through the day. There'll be a bit more of a breeze coming in from the east, so a cool day here with some brightness further south. We could again get up to 20 Celsius. Bye for now.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
The next Great British Giveaway winner could be you, with a massive £20,000 in tax-free cash to be won. Imagine how you'd react getting that winning call from us.
Oh my God, are you joking?
Not a line, I never won a penny in my life.
I don't know what to say.
Do you know what? I've never won anything like this in my life. Oh my God. Oh God. Oh, it shocks me.
This is amazing.
For another chance to win £20,000 in tax-free cash, text PRIZE to 63232. Text costs £2 plus one standard network rate message. Or post your name and number to GB05, PO Box 8690, Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on the 31st of May. Full terms and privacy notice at gbnews.com/win. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, every Sunday at 9:30 when I'll be interviewing the key players in British politics and taking them to task.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial.
With an upcoming election looming over Westminster, now is the time for clear, honest answers.
I agree.
And that's precisely what I'll get.
Is he indecisive? Incompetent?
That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's election channel.
Are the newspapers getting you down?
My wife didn't divorce me that month.
Struggling to separate the wheat from the chaff?
I know that it's a bit of a circus at the best of times.
Well, don't worry. Headliners has got you covered. We'll take the burden of reading the day's news, and if we get depressed, who cares? It's an occupational hazard, frankly. That's Headliners on GB News from 11 p.m. till midnight, and the following morning, 5 till 6 a.m. on GB News, the comedy channel. Nah, just kidding. Britain's news channel.
It's 10 p.m. I'm Patrick Christys. Tonight,
Rishi Sunak, look me in the eye. When are you going to start to do the right thing? The vaccine damage payment scheme is not fit for purpose.
GB News is under attack. They want to silence us. I respond to Ofcom's ridiculous verdict next. And
it was incompetence. It was a disgraceful disregard of even the practices that were in place at the time.
It's time to prosecute those responsible for the infected blood scandal. I speak to a victim's relative. Plus, shocking evidence of the police taking sides in the Israel versus Palestine protest marches. And a shameful scene in the United Nations that will blow your mind. My top panel tonight is Daily Express columnist Carol Malone, Labour Party member and journalist Benjamin Butterworth, and political commentator Suzanne Evans. Oh yes, and find out what's going on here. Get ready, Britain. Here we go. Enough is enough. It's time for GB News to hit back at Ofcom. Next.
Very good evening to you. I'm Aaron Armstrong in the GB Newsroom. The Prime Minister has offered an unequivocal apology to victims of the infected blood scandal, and says the findings of a 5-year inquiry should shake our nations to its core. The inquiry found a subtle, pervasive and chilling cover-up from those in positions of trust and power, including the deliberate destruction of documents by government officials. The final report concluded patients were knowingly exposed to unacceptable risks and the scandal could have largely been avoided. More than 30,000 people were infected with either HIV or hepatitis C through contaminated blood products. The Prime Minister has promised to pay whatever it takes to compensate the victims.
This is a day of shame for the British state. Today's report shows a decades-long moral failure at the heart of our national life. From the National Health Service to the civil service, to ministers in successive governments, at every level, the people and institutions in which we place our trust failed in the most harrowing and devastating way. They failed the victims and their families, and they failed this country.
Chair of the inquiry, Sir Brian Langstaff, found victims' suffering had been compounded by the slow pace of government compensation. And in waiting for the conclusion of the report, Rishi Sunak, he said, had perpetuated the injustice. The Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer, also apologised, saying victims had been failed by all parties, including his.
I acknowledge that this suffering was caused by wrongdoing, delay and systemic failure across the board, compounded by institutional defensiveness. And as Sir Brian Langstaff makes clear in his report, any apology today must be accompanied by action.
And some breaking news just in: a woman in her 50s has been mauled to death by her own XL bully dogs at a home in Hornchurch in East London. She was treated by emergency services but was pronounced dead at the scene. The 2 registered dogs have since been seized. The parents of a baby girl say they'll never forgive the callousness of a nursery worker who's been convicted of manslaughter. 37-year-old Kate Ruffley placed 9-month-old Genevieve Meehan face down on a beanbag for an hour and a half while working at the Tiny Toes nursery in Cheadle Home in May 2022. Colleagues and paramedics tried to revive the baby, but she was declared dead at the scene. Ruffley's been remanded in custody and will be sentenced later this week. And Julian Assange can mount a fresh appeal against his extradition to the United States on charges of leaking military secrets. The WikiLeaks founder will now be able to challenge US assurances on how a trial there would be conducted and over the protection of his right to free speech. Mr. Assange faces prosecution on espionage charges relating to the disclosure of information about the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, which the US argues endangered lives. More on all of our stories in our later bulletins, or you can get more right now by scanning the QR code on your screen for GB News Alerts. Now it's back to Patrick.
GB News is under attack. Everybody can see that there is a concerted attempt by establishment figures and hard-left activist groups to shut us down. The latest Ofcom ruling against GB News is chilling. To be clear, Ofcom has decided that ordinary, normal people, undecided voters, who were selected by an independent company and asked questions to the Prime Minister that we were not allowed to see or vet in advance, somehow breached their broadcasting code. They say that the Prime Minister's views were uncontested. Really?
Why are the people who are in charge, who told us all to do the right thing, have left us all to rot?
Over the course of an hour, the Prime Minister was grilled on chronic underfunding for social care, the housing shortage, the failure of the Rwanda plan and LGBT rights. How can that possibly be a breach of impartiality rules? We go to extreme lengths to provide balance here. My show on Thursday night included 2 card-carrying members of the Revolutionary Communist Party. One of the most booked guests on this channel is a left-wing immigration lawyer. LGBT activist Peter Tatchell appears all the time. On tonight's show, there is a member of the Labour Party on my sofa. On Michelle Dewberry's show this evening, the founder of hard-left Novara Media was fulfilling his role as a regular panellist. Ofcom may say that they received 547 complaints about the People's Forum with the Prime Minister Rishi Sunak, but it is about time that people knew the truth about why GB News and no other broadcaster ends up with this amount of complaints. There are people who watch GB News 24/7 with the sole intention of finding a piece of content that they don't like so they can gratuitously report it to Ofcom. They will clip it up and try to spread it as far and wide as possible, and include a link beneath it about how to complain. When the then Tory Deputy Chairman Lee Anderson interviewed Home Secretary Suella Braverman, a social media campaign before that show went on air contributed to the 1,600 complaints Ofcom received about it. This is what we're up against. Hundreds, if not thousands, of people make spurious complaints about things that are yet to be broadcast, but they have already decided they hate. This is not about due impartiality. It's about shutting us down. Of course, Ofcom rightly decided that Mr Anderson's show hadn't actually breached any rules because, shock horror, we had people on that show who had the polar opposite views to both the presenter and Mrs Braverman. But this is what we're up against. In the case of the Prime Minister's People Forum, I think Ofcom got it badly wrong. But in general, they have a very difficult time because there are thousands of people who never watch a minute of GB News, who don't actually see the content, but nonetheless submit relentless complaints to try to get us shut down. They want to flood Ofcom with thousands and thousands of complaints to make dealing with us a full-time job, in the hope that eventually they snap and just shut us down. And they only want to attack us. What's the balance like on BBC Question Time? The BBC is allowed to investigate itself. What's the balance like on Channel 4? I look forward to their election night coverage, including Alistair Campbell, Rory Stewart, Emily Maitlis and Claire Balding, fronted by Cathy Newman and Krishnan Guru Murthy, a man who actually got caught on a hot mic calling a Conservative MP a "see you next Tuesday" on the steps of Downing Street. ITV have this lady saying things like this.
And last year it was 28,000 people arrived by boat. So those numbers, we've got twice as many Ukrainians coming to the UK, which were welcomed with opening arms. We had massive campaigns about it. And it feels as though not all migrants are the same. We treat one sector of migrants slightly different from another.
But not everybody's coming from a war-torn country, are they?
And then she goes on and presents their news bulletins. There is no way on earth that we would get away with that. Channel 4 had Sir Keir Starmer on, doing a lovely personality puff piece yesterday, cooking a tandoori salmon. That is a promotional job for the Labour Party. Now, let me be very clear about this. GB News is under attack. There is a campaign to silence us. That campaign started before we'd even launched as a TV channel. Politically motivated activists just want us gone. Everyone can see through that. Ofcom needs to see through that as well. I will never, ever, ever stop fighting for the rights of ordinary people in Britain to have a television station that truly, for the first time ever, represents them. Ofcom said in a statement, "We found that an appropriately wide range of significant viewpoints were not presented and given due weight in the People's Forum, the Prime Minister, nor was due impartiality preserved through clearly linked and timely programmes. As a result, we consider that the Prime Minister had mostly uncontested platform to promote the policies and performance of the government in a period preceding a UK general election." Well, I am joined now by former BBC executive and presenter Roger Bolton. Roger, are we being unfairly treated here? Has Ofcom got it badly wrong?
It's a mess, basically. There isn't a campaign by Ofcom to silence you or politically. There doubtless are people in the country who don't like you and don't want you to broadcast. But there's a terrible confusion here about what impartiality is, what due impartiality is, and the rules under which people should broadcast. And I think Ofcom haven't made themselves clear, and I think GB News has made some daft mistakes. For example, if you had done that interview with the Prime Minister or discussion with the Prime Minister and followed it a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks later with a programme with the Leader of the Opposition, you wouldn't have had a lot of this problem.
Roger, can I just ask you on that point, and you've got your opinion there, how much GB News do you generally consume?
Quite a lot, because I've had the great privilege and fortune of appearing on your programme. I think
I just think, sorry, Roger, if you'd have watched that programme, you would have heard on that programme that we had offered the exact same thing to Keir Starmer, and we have been in touch with the Labour Party about it. So that has happened.
Yes, but it hasn't happened, has it?
Well, whose fault's that? It's in the pipeline.
What would happen with other broadcasters would be that if they were doing something like that, they'd have to schedule an interview with the Leader of the Opposition very close to that, to the one with the Prime Minister. So that's the first thing. The second thing is you have an obligation to have a wide range of views of people who are asking questions. Now, obviously, there were one or two people in that programme who were critical of the Prime Minister. But in Ofcom's view, and Ofcom has done a lot to try and help GBNews, frankly, keep going. In Ofcom's view, there's not a wide enough range of views on that programme. That may be true, that may be not true.
Why is the BBC allowed to regulate itself?
Well, it is partly, but not... Well, hold on a second. It doesn't regulate itself, really, in the sense that it's responsible to Ofcom in some areas. Of course, it's directly... its trustees, its non-executive directors and so on are appointed directly.
Yeah, so it can give itself a slap on the wrist if it thinks it's done something wrong and everyone has to move on.
Oh, no, government... Hold on a second. Is there no broadcasting organisation in the world that gets criticised as much as the BBC? All politicians criticise it. Everybody alleges that it's biased. You allege it's biased. The suggestion that the BBC doesn't get hammered every single day on the Middle East coverage or whatever, it's non-stop. You're talking in a slightly paranoid way, in my view.
I'm not talking in a slightly paranoid way because I'm about to give you some cast-iron examples of this, actually. So, on Question Time, the Tony Blair hustings on BBC in 1997, there was no massive uproar then at all, was there? Newsnight, a special again, featured Tony Blair versus Jeremy Paxman in 2003. A Blair versus an audience on a Newsnight special. We're not seeing calls for massive clampdowns on the BBC for doing actually very similar things.
You're really confused about that. What that was, the 1997 programme, for example, would be a programme which would be scheduled in the run-up to the election, followed by another programme with the leader of the with the Conservative Party. It would be, but now, if the Tories wish to appear in front of a larger audience, it would have happened, I'm sure. But if you look back, you'll see that there would be interviews with each of the party leaders closely together. So I don't see that you can say, oh, well, there was that example, that proves something else. It doesn't. It's just under the rules, under an election, there are rules specifically and under the run-up to an election, 3 or 4 weeks to an election.
But we're not in that period. This is the thing. We're not in that period. And I will emphasise again, Roger, we were in talks and are in talks with Labour for the same thing. Keir Starmer was offered it, is my understanding anyway, was actually offered it before Rishi Sunak was offered it. So, it's not just down to us, is it? I can't drag Keir Starmer into a studio kicking and screaming. Can I also just say, do you not find that Ofcom potentially... Roger, can I just put this to you? When Ofcom knows that it receives preemptive and gratuitous complaints about GBNews before programmes even go to air, sometimes in their hundreds, sometimes in their thousands, do they not have a duty to think, hang on a minute, is there not a hard activist campaign here to shut down a channel that people attempted to boycott before it even was outputted for a minute?
Yes, but of course they'd be sensible enough to know that if these complaints are issued before the programme's gone out, they'll take that into account. The thing I can't understand about your position is this. You're acting as if it's only you, only your organisation, that gets, abuse from the public and abuse from politicians. This is what we all put up with. What you need to do and what Ofcom need to do are to get together and have a proper discussion about what you're allowed to do and what you aren't allowed to do. You have to play by the rules, and it's quite legitimate for you to say then, we don't like the rules, we want them changed. But you have to play by the...
I think the point I will leave you with, whilst I absolutely respect you coming on 100%, Roger, and there's no question about that. You seem like a really lovely guy. But what I will put it to you, and I will not be moved on this, is that there is one rule for us and one rule for everybody else. But there's Roger Bolton there, who's a former BBC executive.
I don't believe that at
You're
all.
entitled to disagree, absolutely, and I'm sure you do, but I will not be moved on that. But thank you very much, Roger. Let's get the thoughts of my panel this evening. I've got Daily Express columnist Carol Malone. I have got, for what it's worth, Labour Party member and also journalist Benjamin Butterworth, and also political commentator Suzanne Evans. Right, look, Carol, I'll start with you on this. Is it one rule for us and one rule for everybody else? Is Ofcom way out of line?
Yeah, I think they are. And I have huge respect for Roger Bolton. I mean, I've known about Roger Bolton for years now. But let's get some facts here. 10 out of the 14 members on the Ofcom Content Board are ex-BBC employees. The figures I have pulled up today, in the years 21 to 22, the BBC referred 478 complaints. It got 800,000. It referred, which it's allowed to do, these complaints to Ofcom. Do you know how many were upheld of those complaints?
No.
One in 2 whole years. So when you say is it one rule for one? Yes. Nadine Dorries, when she was Culture Secretary, she was planning to target Ofcom for its bias towards the BBC. So it is very definitely biased towards the BBC.
Could I ask, do we need a regulator, Ben?
Yes, I think we do, because it really is important to have different views, to have a variety, and I think it would be a mistake to go down the US-style route where you have networks that actually really do peddle misinformation and they don't give viewers a full picture. I think, you know, British consumers of TV are perfectly capable of taking on different sides. But I think you have a problem, because you now have social media where people whip up outrage to make complaints, but they haven't necessarily watched it. 2019, I had the second most complained about moment on telly in an argument with Piers Morgan.
It was fine.
And I said, yeah.
It was fine.
And actually, that was far more controversial than a lot of what got complaints here, but it was on ITV. So I absolutely agree with the regulator. I don't think that should be dropped, but I think they have a real difficulty at the moment.
Is there a double standard for other broadcasters compared to us?
Yes, I think there is. We were talking earlier, you know, about the left-wing march through the institutions, and I'm afraid I think Ofcom is one of those institutions that's been captured. You talk about them on Twitter. They're called Ofcommunists. Now, I wouldn't go that far, not remotely, but I think their judgment and impartiality is in question. So just to give you one example, they, for instance, was one of the organisations that was signed up to Stonewall's diversity in the workplace organisation, their equality project, and Stonewall would say, right, what have you done to support LGBT issues? And they'd report, well, we censored this programme and we censored that programme. Now, that is an inbuilt bias that they've willingly signed up to for a left-wing agenda.
But interestingly, Suzanne, there was one of their boards, there's quite a few boards on Ofcom, one of their diversity boards had one person of colour, one barmaid person on that board, and they were supporting diversity in one person.
They do, it is one... I mean,
total double standards.
I've done question time 6 times. Now, that audience has, on all 6 occasions, been predominantly left-wing. There's no doubt about that. And as a right-wing person on it, you feel that very strongly.
Absolutely, Benjamin, because we're out of time.
I can identify with being in a minority.
I'm sure you
Absolutely.
But you know what? I would say I've been on this channel since launch night with Carol, and, you know, I get more free speech here than I do at most other places.
It's a good place. It's a good place to draw a line under it. Like I've said, look, earlier on, we emphasised Ofcom's comments there. They're clearly not moving on this. We heard Roger Bolton, etc. Coming up, as a top Cambridge academic estimates that the UK owes a whopping £200 billion in slavery reparations, are reparation payments just virtue signalling? Plus, what's going on here? I'll reveal all when I deliver the very first of tomorrow's front pages. But next, Rishi Sunak has apologised to the victims of the infected blood scandal, branding it a day of shame for the British state. Should we now prosecute those responsible? I speak to Ruth Spellman, who tragically lost her husband after he was infected with hepatitis C in 1989. This is Patrick Christys Tonight. We're only on GB News.
We're GB News, and we come from a proud tradition of British journalism.
That's why I'm so excited to be here. It's something so new.
The first news channel to be launched in Britain in over 30 years.
Launched to represent the views of the British people.
To go where other broadcasters refuse to go.
How did you find out about the story in the first place?
Launched with one aim.
To be the fearless champion of Britain.
It's an absolutely fantastic atmosphere here.
This is GB News. The People's
Channel. GB News, Britain's news channel.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
Between 1955 and 1989, an average of 55 nuclear tests were conducted across the globe each year. More than 30,000 young British and Commonwealth servicemen served at British test locations in Australia and the Pacific Ocean. But in the years since, those who were involved say they've been ignored and lied to about their exposure to radiation. For decades, Lab Rats International has represented the millions across the world exposed to fallout from the testing programmes and the families who still suffer today from illness and deformities. Last year, the government unveiled the Nuclear Test Medal, recognising the military, civilian and overseas staff and personnel who participated in Britain's nuclear testing programme in the 1950s. But for Lab Rats founder Alan Owen, whose own father was a nuclear test veteran, the work is only just beginning. In September, they launched a legal challenge to the Ministry of Defence, to provide the test veterans full medical records, which they say they've been denied access to.
We sit in this bubble as the nuclear test veteran community, fighting against the establishment. And they will say, you know, ministers will go in Parliament and say, all you've got to do is apply for your medical records and they'll give them to you. You know, it just doesn't happen. It's not a reality. They're not there to as easy, as accessible as just applying. They will fight you all the way. They will delay it.
In response, a government spokesperson said, "We are grateful to all service personnel who participated in the British nuclear testing programme, which is why we have formally recognised them with an official medal. Nuclear test veterans who believe they have suffered ill health due to service have the existing and long-standing right to apply for no-fault compensation under the War Pensions Scheme. The fight for these veterans and their families lives on, because thousands who came before never got the recognition and justice for their service."
GB News is the home of free speech. We were created to champion it, and we deliver it day in, day out.
Free speech allows us all to explore and debate openly the issues most important to us, our families, and of course, the British people.
Having challenging conversations to enlighten each other.
Which is why we hear all sides of the argument.
We are the People's Channel.
We will always stand by the freedom to express yourself.
On TV, radio and online.
This is GB News,
Britain's news channel.
2024, a battleground year.
The year the nation decides.
As the parties gear up their campaigns for the next general election.
Who will be left standing when the British people make one of the biggest decisions of their lives?
Who will rise?
And who will fall? Let's find out together.
For every moment, the highs, the lows, the twists and turns.
We'll be with you for every step of this journey.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel.
Welcome back to Patrick Christys Tonight. All of tomorrow's newspaper front pages are coming very, very soon, but decades of failure, and let's be honest, an absolutely massive cover-up by the British state, has been exposed as the inquiry into the infected blood scandal continued today, that patients were betrayed in the worst treatment disaster in NHS history. The chair of the inquiry, Sir Brian Langstaff, named and shamed scores of politicians, including, by the way, Ken Clarke and Sir John Major, as he detailed how ministers and doctors closed ranks to hide the truth for decades.
The NHS and successive governments compounded the agony by refusing to accept that wrong had been done. More than that, the government repeatedly maintained that people received the best available treatment, and that testing of blood donations began as soon as the technology was available, and both claims were untrue.
And so it fell to Prime Minister Rishi Sunak to apologise to the victims and their relatives today.
This is a day of shame for the British state. Today's report shows a decades-long moral failure at the heart of our national life. From the National Health Service to the civil service, to ministers in successive governments, at every level, the people and institutions in which we place our trust failed in the most harrowing and devastating way.
The scandal relates to a period between 1970 and 1988 in which about 6,000 people with bleeding disorders like haemophilia were treated with contaminated blood that contained HIV and hepatitis. Many of them would go on to unintentionally infect their partners because they were unaware of their own infections. The infected blood was usually imported from the United States, where people were paid to donate, thus incentivising those with high infection rates. For example, drug addicts, sex workers and prisoners. They gave blood. More than 3,000 people have died and around 1,250 were infected with HIV, including 380 children. I'm joined now by Ruth Spellman, whose husband sadly died in 2009 after receiving contaminated blood transfusions in the late 80s. Ruth, thank you very, very much. Is it time to prosecute those responsible?
Well, I think in the light of the inquiry today, there is clear evidence that ministers in particular knew of the risks that they were asking the British public to take and were less than honest in the way they transmitted knowledge about how to deal with the issues once they arose, and didn't do what they should have done in the first instance, which was ensure that we were self-sufficient in blood in this country. The reason we were importing blood from the American prison system was because it wasn't available in the UK. And David Owen, in particular, was the minister who owned up to that and set an objective that we should be self-sufficient. So I believe my husband and many other people would not have been killed if we had pursued that objective, if we'd been consistent, and if we carried out our policy intention properly. And I must admit that if I look now at the inquiry and what it stood for at the time and what it stands for now, it's sadness and regret that these things have happened, but it's also feeling that a lot of people would like to see proper justice done. Those people who got it wrong should be told in no unequivocal terms that they did get it wrong. And the systems and process which Sir Brian has now recommended in his report, which is a voluminous report, which has many detailed recommendations, that all those recommendations are implemented and as soon as possible. You know, my husband died he died in 2009, but he got infected in 1989. So I've been waiting for 35 years for justice for my Bill. And that's the truth. My children will never know him properly. He will never see his grandchildren. That's the reality of what has happened to so many families. And I've talked to many of the other victims too, who would share their stories with me. This was a terrible, terrible tragedy and completely avoidable. And I think Sir Brian today has made that exactly, has said that quite unequivocally to 2,000 people at the Central Hall in Westminster.
It's absolutely heartbreaking. And you mentioned there that there's been a lack of justice. The political cover-up, but also, let's be honest as well, the NHS culture of cover-up. Do you trust that nothing like this could ever happen again on the NHS, do you think?
Well, not at the moment, I don't, because the recommendations that Sir Brian has made are in themselves. I don't know when they're going to be implemented, and a lot of people feel the same way. The first thing that Sir Brian said today, was patient safety should have been the paramount concern of all politicians and medics involved in the treatment. And it wasn't. It was their political reputations. It was their personal, professional reputations. And it was the potential for legal or financial claims against them that was dominating. And it's clear from many of the statements that have been given to the inquiry and from the evidence that's been collected that those factors took over from their primary duty, which was to protect the patients. And we need to know in this country that the NHS and the people who run it are going to protect us.
Well, and sadly, I reported on this show last week that this what they do to whistleblowers is still going on today. Look, can I just ask you? I think most people would absolutely say prosecution 100%. And Andy Burnham was out earlier talking about potential corporate manslaughter. A lot of people want to see all of these recommendations implemented, as you said. I wonder whether or not the one point of controversy about all of this is about compensation, because presumably that would have to be taxpayer-funded compensation, which I don't know what that could rack up anyway, the bill. Where are you on that? Should the taxpayer be paying compensation, do you think?
Yes, I do. And I think, unfortunately, it does fall to the taxpayer, but then we all pay our taxes for the NHS, don't we? We need to know it works. And what happens if it doesn't work? What happened if we cut corners because it was more expensive to test that blood? In the time that those decisions were taken, it was made on economic grounds. So I think we've got to remove economics from this and actually look at what happened, what those people have gone through, how much suffering they've endured. And not to pay compensation means you don't care. It means that after all of that, we haven't learned a single lesson. So I think it's fundamental. But I want to say two other things. There are two other major conclusions that came out of the inquiry today. If we had screened the blood properly then, and if we are not screening blood properly now, that's a lesson which we should be learning. Viral infections can be transmitted very easily through blood. So that commitment to having safe blood supplies in this country needs to be sacrosanct now, and it's just as relevant today as it was when this happened. And the other point that I'd like to draw out is that our public servants need to be open and transparent, especially when it comes to people's health. And if you look at the NHS, they are public servants just as civil servants are, just as ministers are. They are paid by us through taxpayers' money, and they owe us openness and transparency. And that was conspicuous by its absence.
Hear, hear. Look, Ruth, thank you. Thank you very much. A pleasure to talk to you, albeit under, incredibly bleak circumstances. But I do hope to talk to you again soon. I do hope that you get exactly what you're after. That's Ruth Spellman there, whose husband sadly passed away in 2009 after being given infected blood in the late 80s. Thank you very much. Coming up, I show you the moment that West Streeting forgets Labour's election pledges. But next, I bring you the very first of tomorrow's newspaper front pages. They are hot off the press. They are landing in front of me as we speak, so don't go anywhere.
Evening, welcome to your latest weather update from the Met Office here on GB News. A messy picture with the weather tomorrow. Most of us cloudier and cooler than today, but again, like today, there will be a few thunderstorms in place. We're between weather systems, but this area of low pressure is pushing up from the south and will generate a few more showers. We'll see the cloud thickening across East Anglia and the East Midlands with some showers here. The downpours we've seen across Northern Ireland, they will continue to fade through this evening, and many places will have a dry night. A bit misty and murky once more on these eastern coasts. Quite chilly across Scotland again. Temperatures down to about 3 to 5 degrees in rural spots, whereas in the south, many towns and cities staying in double figures. A cloudier day then on Tuesday, particularly over the Midlands, parts of northeast England and along the east coast of Scotland, especially Aberdeenshire up towards Orkney. Grey, misty and murky with that har sticking around, but a good part of Scotland actually starting sunny. Generally a dry start in Northern Ireland, but we are looking at some thunderstorms breaking out here later on. And we'll start with a lot of cloud over the Midlands, Northern England, and generally quite a drab day over central and eastern England. But some sunshine for Wales and southwest England. As the day goes on, increasing chance of again seeing some thunderstorms breaking out across Northern Ireland, but also southwestern parts of England. There's a Met Office warning in place. Wet weather will continue to affect parts of central and eastern England. A few scattered showers over the Highlands. Some brightness in western Scotland, but as I said, most places cloudier than today, and as a result cooler. More cloud and rain then spill in from the east as we head into Wednesday. Could be a very soggy day over parts of eastern England and parts of Scotland. Some heavy downpours possible, and in the south some brighter spells may well trigger some heavy showers as we go through the day. There'll be a bit more of a breeze coming in from the east, so a cool day here with some brightness further south. We could again get up to 20 Celsius. Bye for now.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens.
With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK,
GB News brings you accurate reporting of the day's topical agenda.
When the news breaks, wherever and whenever it's happening,
we'll be there.
This is GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
I'm Nigel Farage, and this is GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Neil Oliver, every Sunday night at 6 p.m. on GB News. And if an hour is not nearly enough for you, go to gbnews.com for special extended episodes online every Friday at 9 p.m, where we can truly get into the nitty-gritty of what's going on. GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Emily Carver. This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to Patrick Christys Tonight. Now it's time to bring you the very first look at tomorrow's newspaper front pages. Let's do it. OK, so I start with the Metro. Chilling verdict on NHS catastrophe. 40 years of bloody cover-up. This is the infected blood scandal. The Eye, day of shame for Britain. Blood scandal cover-up killed thousands. They call it the biggest treatment disaster in NHS history. Patients were knowingly exposed to unacceptable risks and successive governments covered it up. The Telegraph, a day of shame for the British state. They've also got, so obviously on the infected blood scandal, they've also got US condemns the ICC calls for Netanyahu arrest warrant. Let's go to the Daily Mail. They also lead with the tainted blood scandal. Day that shames the British state. A landmark report. Horrifying failures. 3,000 deaths. 40 years cover-up. Families fear no one will ever have to face justice. The Guardian. Again, it's day of shame. Big picture there of some of the relatives of the people who suffered as a result of the infected blood scandal. Let's whiz it over to the Mirror. They've got a good front page. It is the pictures of the people who sadly have lost their lives. It really hammers it home when you see their actual faces, doesn't it? Lies, cover-ups, evidence destroyed. That's a classic line again, evidence destroyed. It's a massive cover-up. Make guilty face justice. We whiz you over to the Times. Look, if you hadn't guessed it yet, there's a theme on tomorrow's front pages. Britain's day of shame over tainted NHS blood calls for charges in the scandal that cost 3,000 lives. We go round it off, why not, with the Daily Express. PM apologises for the cover-up, although, to be fair, it's not really British United's fault, is it? But anyway, this is a day of shame for the British state. Again, really heartbreaking victims there, or relatives of victims on the front page. Right, I am joined again by my press pack. We've got Daily Express columnist Carol Malone, journalist and broadcaster Benjamin Butterworth, and political commentator Suzanne Evans. I'm going to knock it on a bit because we had the blood scandal with a relative of one of the victims there, and it's all over the front pages. So I want to bring this story to your attention because a woke Cambridge University academic has claimed in his new book, Britain's Slavery Debt, that the UK owes £205 billion to Caribbean nations for its role in the slave trade. So, this guy is called Dr. Michael Banner, and his calculation was, obviously rejected by MPs who told him that he wasn't living in the real world. However, the Cambridge Don has called for the Scottish Government to show leadership and begin repaying their share of reparations, which stands at £20 billion. Well, there we go. Carol, should Brits be expected to cough up at the behest of a Cambridge Don who, by the way, I was told earlier on, maybe the same person who thought that Jesus was trans?
That makes as much sense as what he said here. I mean, last year, some leading international judge said Britain owed 19 trillion, so at least this one's a bit less. Let's just look at this reparation. The thing about slavery was practiced in every inhabited continent, and all races were part of it. So this reparations argument collapses because there is no one alive today who doesn't have an ancestral link to slavery. So that means we're all due to pay. And this ridiculous notion now that if you have some forefather who was in any way involved in slavery, you are tainted as an evil person who has to repay. It just does not make any sense anymore. No. And you think about it, the slavery in the UK, if we look at what's happening now in this country, currently there are 130,000 modern-day slaves in the UK as we speak. That's
exactly my point. Yeah.
And around the world, 29 million. Why aren't we doing something about them? Why aren't the people shouting for reparations of something that happened 200 years ago, dealing with this? There
was a clip that went viral over the weekend, which I've decided not to show here tonight because it is beyond the pale, I think, really, but of African slaves, right, being moved from mine to mine and sold off by other Africans, right? And it just makes me think, why should I and my family be paying reparations for things that didn't happen in our name?
Africans were some of the biggest slavers in the world.
Well, first of all, obviously Jesus wasn't transgender because Christianity's a fairy tale, so that's not possible. Secondly, actually, I do think that this man has a point because Britain went around the world pillaging countries of their resources, of their people, abusing them and taking that money and that profit back home. And we benefit from generations of that abuse.
So does every country.
But Britain was the country, that did it most acutely and most effectively.
And the fact is, absolutely historically incorrect. Portugal, for a start. You're wrong.
Tell me this. So, should we be asking the Italians for reparations when the Romans came here? What about the Danes when the Vikings invaded? Come on. As Carol said, there is nobody alive today who had anything to do with slavery. We are all in some way connected to slavery. We've all been victims of slavery. And this is just ridiculous. No money will ever be enough for these people. But congratulations to this academic. But
He's
got some good publicity.
So Scotland should lead the way, though. Benjamin, let's do it then. All right, I don't mind doing it if the Scots do it. So go on. Should the SNP up north of the border, should they lead the way now and do this? They start by paying
the Scottish aristocrats are at the forefront of the British Empire. Hong Kong is much of it's named after Scots, so yes, they should. But look, the fact is that there's a very practical thing here. Africa is the continent expected to have the biggest economic growth this century. It's expected to be completely transformed. And if we don't start paying some of the consequences of why the last century was so poor for them, then I think it makes diplomatic sense for us to support them.
Reports have been been published, I think there was one by the IEA a couple of weeks ago, which showed that actually the result of the slave trade to Britain's wealth was negligible.
Exactly.
Absolutely negligible. Yeah. OK. I really... again, it makes me very concerned about the state of academia, that we've got people out there publishing books. 205...
That you don't agree with.
Yeah, all right, I do not agree with £205 billion for slavery reparations. Yeah, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I mean, also, why doesn't that guy start by paying? I bet that guy...
And this bloke who's connected to Cambridge University, you know, Cambridge University drips with Norman money and influence. So we're going to get compensation from the Anglo-Saxons for that? So what's he going on about?
You know what it is? It's guilt. It's someone like him who just cannot live with the guilt of having quite a nice life. And
this can't be guilt, Patrick, because he doesn't know anybody who was alive.
It's a self-preservation technique.
This is 200 years ago.
You know, the Prime Minister of Barbados, the first country to get rid of the British head of state in many decades, she said that it was a consequence of Britain and the underfunding when it was run by Britain that damaged Barbados today. And the now King Charles went to Barbados and apologised for our role in the slave trade.
So he said so. We can all move on.
That was bloody good of him, more progressive than you.
It was bloody good of him. He's gone over there and he said, well, we're really sorry. I don't think you need to apologise.
Well, the King is on my side, Patrick.
They should have been very grateful for the apology. They've got one, and now we can all move on. Right now, as you may have seen, last week, Keir Starmer announced that Labour's 6 pledges for the election campaign, none of them have new policies, by the way, but after his epic failure, the Shadow Health Secretary, Wes Streeting, won't be much use knocking on doors.
Cut NHS waiting list, 6,500 extra teachers, secure border command, Great British Energy, and what's the one I've missed? I've done them out of order.
Oh, we can show you.
Luckily,
if you forget all you're looking in your pledge. It's got his pledge card. There you are.
There we are. No, I've got one here.
Suzanne. He's not going to live that down, is he?
He's not, but you know what? I've got some sympathy for him, actually.
Have you?
Because, as a former politician, you know you've got a set line of things to say, and it's, I can't remember the last one. I have got some sympathy for him.
I have none, because he knows absolutely full well, because the Labour spokesman said before Starmer made that speech, he said, none of these are set in stone. So they haven't even bothered to learn what they are, because they know none of them are going to happen.
Them up on the hoof anyway.
Of course they do.
You know, they ditch some, put some others in. And it's just like, what's the big talking point this week? Yeah, we'll put that on our pledge card this week.
And what are you looking like that for? He's looking like he's...
Well, you know, Rishi Sunak has a pledge to cut the NHS waiting lists and stop the boats. He's not doing very well at that.
Well,
so
Starmer won't
I trust Wes Streeting rather more than what's going on right now.
Oh, do you? Well, let's wait and see what happens there, then.
Let's wait and see. Time now for our giveaway. Yes, and the biggest cash prize we've ever given away. It's £20,000 that you can spend however you like. It's totally tax-free. You'll see every penny of it. But hurry, because the clock is ticking. Here's how the cash could be yours.
The next Great British Giveaway winner could be you, with a massive £20,000 in tax-free cash to be won. Imagine how you'd react getting that winning call from us.
Oh my God, are you joking? Not a line, I never won a penny in my life.
I don't know what to say.
Do you know what? I've never won anything like this in my life. Oh my God. Oh God. Oh, it shocks me. This is amazing.
For another chance to win £20,000 in tax-free cash, text WIN to 63232. Text costs £2 plus 1 standard network rate message. Or post your name and number to GB05 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on the 31st of May. Full terms and privacy notice at gbnews.com/win. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
Coming up, why has the International Criminal Court issued arrest warrants for the Hamas leaders and Benjamin Netanyahu? We discuss it as easy for me to say, as I crown tonight's greatest Britain, Union Jackass Plus. Why have these scenes from the UN sparked international outrage? I'll reveal all straight after this.
I'm Nana Acquia. This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
Nana are Queer, weekends from 3 p.m.
Next up, though, Prince Harry, the Duke of Sussex, did not see Charles during the trip to London this week, it was reported, according to the Times, there are different versions of the story, depending on who asked who, whether they should see who. It's all a bit complicated. The King agreed, apparently, to a request from the Duke of Sussex to stay in a royal residence for the last week of his trip to London, mindful that his youngest son no longer has an official UK residence. That's what's reported. And in the event, however, Harry is thought to have chosen to stay in a hotel during his 3-day visit. Meanwhile, an official scheme to deliver portraits of the King has been extended, and it now includes hospital, Coast Guard centres, job centres, universities, Church of England, churches and other public institutions. Well, let's welcome back to my clashers Lord Daniel Moylan, Conservative member of the House of Lords, and also Norman Baker, former Liberal Democrat minister. Right, Daniel, what do you think, then? Have you been following this royal story with Prince Harry coming to the UK and not seeing his father?
No. To be perfectly honest, I don't find the whole Prince Harry thing terribly interesting. And let's put this in an historical perspective. This is mild stuff. I mean, George III in the 18th century famously got on extremely badly with all his sons, who were absolutely brutal to him and completely horrible during his long reign. And Edward III not only deposed his father, he was almost certainly party to the plot to murder him later. So, you know, just not turning up while the King's at a garden party and so on. This is all very mild stuff. It's not very interesting in the historical perspective. Fathers and sons argue, that includes kings. He hasn't actually set about to achieve any of his historical precedents. He's just sort of going to live in California, which is relatively mild compared to what has happened in the past.
All right, welcome back to Patrick Christys tonight on GB News. As ever, of course, I'm joined by my wonderful press Pat. But look, now, to a shameful moment from the increasingly warped and misguided United Nations Security Council, as they, and I'm not making this up, they stood in remembrance of the murderous Iranian president, Ibrahim Raisi, a man dubbed the Butcher of Tehran.
Now stand and join in observing a minute of silence in remembrance of the loss of life in a helicopter crash of the President of the Islamic Republic of Iran,
I mean, honestly, the US ambassador sparked outrage in his country by taking part in that performance. But I mean, what? Seriously, like, what next? I don't mean seriously. Like, we're going to do a minute's silence for Harold Shipman? I mean, ridiculous.
Or Hitler. You know, I think this is the way the UN has gone. It's just not a. It's just not a fit-for-purpose organisation anymore. You know, you understand protocol. You understand that there is a system, you know, you want to honour somebody who's died. But this guy, I'm sorry, I couldn't have got to my feet. No way.
Today, I saw Anna Diamond, who's a young British-Iranian woman who was sentenced to death by this man as a teenager just for going to visit her family in Iran. And she said this is nature's justice. You know, what the people couldn't do, nature did do.
Yeah, I mean, the idea, we've got the United Nations there, standing up, bending over. I mean, the European Union also said they were going to try to do their best to provide. We need to supply as much satellite data as we've got to Iran to get to the bottom of this. If you gave me a whiff of the fact that the Butcher of Tehran had died, I'd be inclined to go there and make sure he was. It was ridiculous.
Well, no, I'm agreeing with you. I can't think of anything else to say because you've all said it. I'm out of words.
Well, in that case, let me get your views on something else, because a beluga whale in South Korea has been trapped in a shopping centre aquarium for a decade. 13-year-old Bella lost her last companion, Belly, 5 years ago, and there's been public outcry to release her back into the wild. Animal rights protesters have campaigned for her to be freed. Her mental health continues to spiral as she swims lifelessly now around the tank. I mean, it's devastating. That was, you know, old footage of Bella. Apparently, it's just absolutely harrowing. Carol, should aquariums like this be things of the past?
It's hideous, you know. It's like, you know, I don't like circuses now for this very reason, but this is way worse than that. This creature should be in the sea. But the trouble is now, I'm not sure that she could be released back into the wild. She'd probably die.
Could she
This is the
survive
thing,
in the
isn't
wild,
it?
actually?
I don't think so. She'd probably get attacked and whatever.
You see similar things in China. I mean, I think I remember reporting a while ago on I think there was a polar bear in a Chinese shopping mall and stuff like that. And you just think, honestly, we're not beyond it, are we? We're not beyond it. But it makes me want to cry.
The way we treat animals in this country is atrocious.
Well, it's not in this country. We're a lot better than they are, that's for sure.
Yeah, free Bella, I think. Yeah,
so we do that. That's
the whales.
You don't care, do you?
Absolutely.
You don't care. You're trying to summon up a bit of code. Come on, it's Bella though,
No,
isn't it?
I do care. It's wrong. Yeah, free
No strong
Bella.
views about
Careful
Bella
what
the
you
whale.
say with this campaign,
Speaks
because
volumes. That
Ofcom might not like this campaign, might they?
Yeah, Ofcom needs a pro
Can you imagine?
Bella.
That'll be, if that's the thing that finally brings this whole thing crashing down, it's Bella the whale.
For the sake of impartiality, I say lock Bella up.
Lock Bella up, good. You've got us out of Ofcom prison. Right, OK, all right, that's enough. I can hear everyone screaming at the TV. Right, it's time to reveal today's greatest Britain and Union jackass. Carol, your greatest Britain, please.
Well, one is the fantastic actor Timothy Spall. He finally won a BAFTA on Sunday night for his role in The Sixth Commandment, as just filmed about a teacher who was murdered by a pupil. Despite this guy being one of our best actors, he's never won a BAFTA before. I remember in Our Vie de Saint Pet when I was young, and he was fantastic in that. And everything he's done since has been incredible. But I just don't think he's had the recognition he deserves. He's a credit to us. He really is one of our greatest Brits.
My greatest Britons are those affected and infected by the infected blood scandal.
Yeah.
You know, the tenacity that these families have had is remarkable, and they were up against the ultimate enemy in the state of justice, which is an appalling reality, but they did come through in the end. And I think, I just hope the people in Whitehall actually listen to what they're being told about how wrong their behaviour was.
I think the issue now ultimately might be taxpayer-funded compensation, whether that's...
Well, I think some of the pharmaceutical companies should cough up,
no, I agree.
as Dame Diana Johnson said earlier.
Yeah, no, good shout, actually. Go on then, Suzanne.
So mine is a group of pandemic scientists, including Professor Carol Sikora, the oncologist, and the virologist Sunitra Gupta, plus some MPs who are calling for a national campaign to remove all the remaining COVID totalitarian edicts of stickers, loudspeaker announcements for GP surgeries, train stations and supermarkets. Quite right, too. Why are those keep 2 metres away, put your mask on stuff still everywhere? Take them down.
All right, OK. Look, today's winner of the Greatest Britain's is, of course, the unfortunate victims and their relatives as well of this infected blood scandal. So there we go. Who's your union jackass, Carol?
OK, mine's Sir Keir Starmer. The idiocy of this man grows by the day. Never mind his broken political pledges. This is the bloke who thinks women can't have a penis. And this week he says he hasn't eaten meat for nearly 30 years, but he has had chicken. So this bloke, who was the DPP, soon to be our Prime Minister, doesn't realise that chicken is meat. Anyway.
Right, OK. All right, go on then.
My union jackass is the International Criminal Court that equates Israel and its right to defend itself with butchering murders Hamas. I think it's ridiculous and it undermines the UN.
OK.
And mine is the former president of Iran, killed in the helicopter crash. Jackass is too good a term for him, I'm afraid. A horrible butcher executed thousands, including women, for simply not covering their hair.
OK, all right, guys, today's winner is, and I never thought I would say this, the dead president of Iran. OK, look, guys, thank you. Wonderful show tonight. Thank you, everybody who's been watching and listening. And tonight, especially in light of Ofcom's ruling, keep fighting the good fight.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on